Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 7 of our Sexual Assault Victim Advocate Training Series. Today's presentation is on professional ethics, vicarious trauma, and self-care for advocates. My name is Alyssa Garagiola, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter now for her to introduce herself. Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Good morning, all. My name again is Stephanie Ertis. I'm the Associate Director here at MCASA. And we are here to talk about, like Alyssa said, professional ethics, vicarious trauma, and self-care for advocates. So this is really interesting for Alyssa and I this morning because normally this is the last webinar in the series, and it's kind of a treat for folks that have been with us for these 2 weeks to kind of look at what it's like to sustain themselves in this work, how to take care of ourselves, how to honor our professional ethics, how to deal with vicarious trauma. Because of scheduling, we're going a little out of order. So we're presenting it today, and you'll have a different session on Friday. But I want you to really think about today what it's going to be like to leave this training at the end of the week and to start your work with survivors of sexual assault or to continue your work with sexual assault. So the first thing we're going to do is similar to the workshop we had last Monday. And we're just going to take a chance to breathe and bring ourselves into this workshop. So much like I was just kind of talking about, this presentation is really about you. Up until now, and for the next couple of days, we really were talking about how you'll be working with and serving sexual assault survivors. This webinar in our sexual assault victim advocate training focuses on you and preparing and sustaining you for this work. So, like we did in that first webinar at the beginning of the session last week, we want to take some time and begin this session with breathing and grounding. So, I'm going to invite you to relax your gaze, find a comfortable seat. You can also stand or lay down, however you feel most supported in this moment. And then bring your attention to your inhale and your exhale. You're not forcing air in and out, you're just breathing. And you want to try to bring that breath into balance so that your inhales are the same amount of time as your exhales. So relax into the rhythm of your breath and try to let some of your thoughts go for the moment. So if you had a busy morning, if you have a busy afternoon, just let all that go for the next hour and a half as we learn together. We're going to take one deep breath together to the count of 4. So to begin, I invite everyone to exhale all the air in their lungs. Then inhale, filling their lungs to the count of 2, 3, 4. Pause, hold the air in your lungs. And now exhale, emptying your lungs completely to the count of 2, 3, 4. And then take a couple of deep breaths on your own to whatever count feels comfortable to you. Just try to make those inhales and exhales even. And while you're taking those deep breaths, we want to take this time again to acknowledge the survivors that are in our training today and the survivors that we will help as advocates. We want to take a moment here to appreciate ourselves for being in this training, for all that we have learned so far, and all that we will learn the rest of this week. We want to commit to a gentle and honest conversation and dialogue today as we learn together and talk about taking care of ourselves and our community. So if you haven't already, allow your breath to return to normal with just a gentle inhale and exhale, and enjoy a few more moments here. When you're ready, come out of the exercise by beginning to move your body, maybe wiggling your fingers and toes. If your eyes were closed or soft, blink them open. Shrug your shoulders, stretch your arms overhead. Then bring all your focus and attention back to our training. So we're going to begin by talking about professional ethics. So I want to note that this training that we're doing today is actually three mini segments. So we're going to start each segment with the objectives for just that mini training. So when we're talking about professional ethics, by the end of this segment, you'll be able to define boundaries and ethics, explain why boundaries are necessary and important in our advocacy work, and examine ethical dilemmas and apply the ethical compass to our advocacy work. So we'll actually end this segment by giving you kind of a tool to think about ethics in your work as an advocate. So I start off this training with two quotes. And the first one is the first step in the evolution of ethics is a sense of solidarity with other humans. So this quote really defines ethics as how we work with other people. It's dependent on those around us. And the second quote is action indeed is the sole medium of expression for ethics. So this quote connects ethics to our actions. So ethics is about our actions with other people, like at its core. And we'll go into a definition deeper in the presentation as well. But we're going to start. So that talks a little bit about ethics, sets up for this next part of the training. We also want to talk about boundaries because this really can play into our work as an advocate. So boundaries are limits we set for our own protection and for the protection of the survivors or clients we're working with. They help us build a supportive, healing environment. So there's lots of different talk about boundaries, but when you think about boundaries as an advocate, I want you to think of them as building blocks for a protective, healing environment, both an environment for you to work in safely, but also for survivors to engage in safely, so that they can continue their healing. So when we're talking about boundaries and ethics, one of the things I want to say is when it comes to boundaries, the overall best practical advice that I can give you as an advocate is you need to release your attachment to the survivor's choices. If you start having opinions or hopes of what action the survivor might take, or that you think they should be having some certain kind of emotion, then you are definitely crossing a boundary. We talked extensively about empowering survivors and giving them the resources and support they need to make the decision that best fits them. So to empower them, we need to dissolve our own opinions on what we think is best for them and just support them in making the decisions that they think are best for them. So we're going to do a little Slido here. So Slidos, as a reminder, go ahead and hit the QR code with your phone and that'll bring up the Slido, or you can go to slido.com and put in this number 1993705 and it'll take you to this question. So I just want you to answer, what do we create boundaries around in our work? Like what are some of the major themes or topics or ideas that we create boundaries around when we are working with survivors? So go ahead. I see at the top we have some folks typing. So we'll type those answers. They'll come into the chat. They will not say who you are. So it's all anonymous. So these are some good ones. Some more people typing. Excellent. We'll give it a couple minutes. What do we create those boundaries around? Great. These are great answers. Let me see. You can see if there's anyone else typing. Oh yeah, we have 4 people typing. So let me give them a chance. Can keep adding to this. So these are all pretty even, but some of them you'll see have some similarities. So excellent, excellent work. So I'm going to start reviewing some of them. So we've got some stuff about your personal life, your personal boundaries, creating boundaries around your free time, creating boundaries around touch, our bodies, communications, feeling safe in spaces and relationships. So absolutely. I see on here time a couple of times written a couple of different ways. I also see like contact and communication. All of these are absolutely things that we create boundaries around. So excellent work. Thank you all for participating in that. There we go. So these are some of the things that we came up with too. Many of them are just mentioned in the last poll. So personal relationships, money, communication was on there, social media with it, which is part of communication, um, intimate relationships or physical interactions, drugs and alcohol, and confidentiality. So this is not an inclusive list. All those things that were on that you generated in the Slido were also things we create boundaries around. And we create boundaries around these things because people can manipulate them to exert power and control over someone. Sexual assault is about power and control. So, when working with sexual assault survivors, we need to create boundaries around the things that can be used to exert power and control or can be perceived to create a power imbalance that could lead to control. So, when we think about boundaries, that's what we're really trying to do is prevent and protect against that power and control. Both a survivor may be using that, that might be a survival or coping mechanism for them. We don't want them to use that on us as advocates, but we also don't want to put advocates in a situation where they could use that as well. So let's go back to talking a little bit about ethics. So when I looked up the definition of ethics, this is really kind of what it said: a set of moral principles, a theory or a system of moral values. And though this definition is probably technically correct, I felt like it was really circular and really didn't apply as much to our advocacy work as it could have. So I created this definition for us as advocates. So when we're thinking about professional ethics as an advocate, we're really thinking about a set of guidelines that helps us make decisions about our work with survivors. So that's really what we're kind of talking about with ethics. And those guidelines come from a couple of different places. And so we'll talk a little bit about those in these next couple of slides. So let's talk about the code of ethics and what codes of ethics actually are. So professional ethics are professional ethics. They're based on a standardized principle across a field or a company or a nonprofit. So your organization may have a list of like ethics or values that they abide by. There are many professions that across the whole profession, regardless of where you're working, if you work in this profession, you are following those professional ethics. So I want you to give me a thumbs up in the chat if your organization or the profession that you work in has a code of ethics. So some of the examples of this, and I'll look in the chat in a minute. So just a thumbs up emoji if you have professional ethics that you are following, either by the organization that you work for or because of the profession that you are working in. If you don't, there's nothing bad about that. Advocates in general don't typically have like a standard set of ethics, but some professions do. So if you're a social worker, they have an extensive kind of ethical code that they follow, and we'll actually look at some of their ethical code. Same things with licensed practical counselors, a lot of folks in the medical field, so nurses and healthcare professionals. There are like lawyers and also military advocates. So we're going to look at the military advocates code as well. So various jobs have these agreed upon ethics, and these professions all work with people that have vulnerable circumstances where power differentials can be very, very great. So think about a patient and a doctor or a client and a lawyer. So ethics help protect those individuals and those involved. So I want to look at some of those examples, but first I'm going to go to the chat to see if there are folks that have, oh yeah, lots of thumbs up here. So many of you are kind of familiar with working with an ethical code. So great. Thanks all. So let's look at some of these ethical codes. So for those of you that have ever seen like a professional ethical code, here's some examples. I'm not going to read all of this, but I just want to point out that when it comes to like one of the reasons I use social work is it's really detailed and it really speaks to the work of social workers. So this is a sample. And the social work ethics are often taught to social workers on like day one of their kind of college classes relating to social work. So like social work 101. And many social workers can recite part or all of their ethics by heart. Like they know them very well. And when you're talking about the reason for boundaries and ethics, this is a great example for keeping both the social worker and the client safe. And this makes perfect sense. Social workers deal with highly sensitive cases. They might be working with folks that are suffering from, substance abuse or they might be working in child welfare or sexual assault, mental health. So it's important for them to have this strong, clear ethical code to guide their work. The other thing is, so social workers need to challenge social justice. That's part of their ethical code. So this can also help them if they have to challenge the work environment they're in, or if they have to bring up things that might not be, they can go back to this ethical code and be like, as social workers, it's our job to challenge these things. And some of them, might seem self-explanatory, like behaving in a trustworthy manner. But there are some fields where that's not part of their ethical code. And in social work, that's very much a core of what they do. And I really like this third bullet down because I think it really speaks to our work as advocates. Social workers respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person. So this is always the core that you're going back to when they work with people. And so here's some more just as a sample, and you'll get the PowerPoint so you can read all of these if you want to. There's some things that, like I said, that apply very practically to their work, like maintain documentation in the client's records, like that's part of their ethical code. But there's also, you know, making fees and services clear, informing clients of risk, opportunity, and obligation. Like all of these things kind of work together to help build that protective environment. The other example I really wanted to share with you, we had some folks from this should be DOD, not DOJ. So the Department of Defense and the military victims assistance providers. So these are the folks that are working in the military as sexual assault advocates. And they have a really great ethical code as well. And this is really specific to working with sexual assault survivors. So I wanted to use that as an example too. And some of this language is very similar to the social work one, but social work is for all social workers. This is really kind of an example of an ethical code used for sexual assault survivors. So recognizing the interest of the client and the client's empowerment. Here's this word empowerment that we've talked about over and over and over. That's right in their ethical code. And that is a primary responsibility of these advocates. Respect and take steps to protect the client's civil and legal rights. Respect them. I lost my place here a little bit. Respect the client's right to privacy and confidentiality. These are written right in their code. And here are some other examples as well. So I also kind of like that they talk about, and this might be why if there are some folks from the DoD in our training now, they remain committed to their own professional education to ensure that they're providing those best services. So these are important to their work and core to their work with sexual assault survivors. So I want to talk about advocate ethics quickly before we kind of wrap this section up. But so when we're talking about advocate ethics, there are a couple of things to keep in mind if you come across a hard decision, because this is usually when ethics kind of get involved, is you want to be making a decision that is best for the sexual assault survivor, that's really helping you help them. And so there might be laws that govern that. So there are laws and there are grant regulations that govern like how we deal with confidentiality and privacy. Maybe if that is not available, like if the situation isn't like written out really clearly, you have your supervisor in your organization to go to. So you can say, hey, I have this issue. I really need to think about like what's the best thing to do here. Can I talk to my supervisor about that? And the two of you can come up with a good plan. Supervisors are not always available, especially if you're doing some of the advocacy we talked about earlier in the training, like hotline advocacy. So you might be getting a call at 2 in the morning, or hospital advocacy when you're with a hospital in the hospital at 11 o'clock at night. So this is where ethics really come in and they kind of fill in those gaps. And these are some things to think about as an advocate when it comes to ethics. So you want to be focused on the survivor's wishes. And sometimes that's your only job is to just be working with that survivor. You want to advocate for the survivor in the way that the survivor feels comfortable. And then here is this word empowerment again. Empower the survivor to navigate barriers. So some of these barriers you will have navigated before. And so you'll be able to share information with that survivor so they can make the decisions that are best for them. You want to be honest with the survivor. You want to stay within your realm of your job responsibilities. So if you are a social worker, but you are working as a hotline advocate, so you're not working as a social worker, you want to make sure you're staying within the realm of your job. So you're not practicing law or you're not engaging in counseling if that's not the role you're supposed to be taking. And you want to maintain boundaries. So coming back to how boundaries tie into ethics. So I want to talk about, before we move into a little activity, why are ethics important in our field? And I think that this goes back to some of the original like creation of advocacy and sexual assault. So advocates in sexual assault started out as grassroots advocates activism, sorry. So this grassroots activism were people in communities, people in organizations, people in faith-based organizations like churches and synagogues that were like, we need to do something about this. And so this didn't start out of some kind of profession. It started because people in the community were concerned. And then they got professionals involved, lawyers, counselors, other folks that were just advocates or had experience kind of coming together to create rape crisis centers or domestic violence shelters. And so our commitment to ethics gives that advocacy legitimacy. We don't have licenses. We don't have a ethical code as advocates. We may be acting as advocates in the profession of social work or something else, but generally advocates don't have that. So it's important for us to kind of develop our own ethical muscle so that we can keep maintaining this legitimacy for advocacy. It safeguards the reputation of the work. It protects the public from exploitation and abuse. And it furthers the competence and responsibility and the practice of our roles as advocates. So as we wrap up this presentation, I want to do a little exercise. So get ready to type because I'm going to ask you a very specific question. So instead of giving you a list of rules or providing you guidelines, which your organization might do, but what do you do when those are not speaking exactly to your situation? We want to give you a guiding principle that you can use to make ethical decisions regarding your work with survivors. It's important to do this because we can't come up with every single scenario. And the second we give you a hard and fast rule, something's going to happen and it's going to be an exception to that rule. So we want you to ask yourself, does this action that I'm going to take with a survivor upset the balance of power between myself and the agency and this person? So does this action upset the balance of power between me and the survivor, or between the organization I'm working for and the survivor? So I'm going to read this little scenario. And like I said, I'm going to ask you a very like a question with an actual answer to it. So imagine that you are out to dinner to celebrate your birthday. And for those of you that work in situations where you are in a rural area, like you're working in a small town, this could absolutely happen. When I did my advocacy work, I worked in two very small towns in the same county, and this was something that advocates talked about happening. So imagine that you're out to dinner for your birthday. You are at your favorite restaurant, and you and your friends are enjoying lots of good food and drinks and treats. And you know the server from your role as an advocate with your organization. They used your services a little while ago, and you know how hard they worked to rebuild their life after the assault. You spend about $37 on your dinner. What is an appropriate tip for this survivor? So you're out to dinner with your friends. You spend about $37 on dinner and drinks and appetizers. What's an appropriate tip? And if you are like, oh my gosh, I would never spend $37, or you're like, oh, I would spend twice that, don't worry about that total. It's just to give you an amount of money. So yeah, what would be an appropriate tip if you know the survivor, you know they are a survivor, you know they used your services, you know they worked really hard. What would be an appropriate tip? And asking yourself what would be a tip that would not upset the balance of power is a fair question. So let's see. You scroll down past your thumbs ups here. So I'm seeing 15 to 20%. However, you would tip a stranger, sure. 20%, 20%, 20%. Keep it the same that you would at other places at that same level. Same as you would tip others, the regular amount. Some people, when we've done this in the past, have used the actual like $5.50 because that's 15% and 740 because that's 20%. So yeah, these are all very good examples. And the example is the right, those are all correct answers. The correct answer is an amount that would not upset the balance of power. So even if you went a little beyond 20%, so like it's $37. You have cash on you, so you want to throw down 45. So that's a little bit more than 20%. That's not enough to upset the balance of power. But if your bill is 37 and you throw down a $50 bill, that's $13 in a tip. That may be something that could make that person feel obligated to your organization or feel kind of weird. So you want to make sure that you don't want to upset that balance of power. And oftentimes, this is not a situation where you could call your supervisor and say, hey, what should I tip here? Or it's written out in your code that if you meet someone and they serve you, you can only give them a 20% tip. So this is kind of a good example of things that might come up for you as an advocate that you should kind of think about. And so I want you, as we leave this section, to remember the hierarchy of decision making. So the first thing you want to look at is in an ethical dilemma is your organization's policies and its values and its practices and what you've learned about your organization. The second level is asking your supervisor. And the third level is relying on this compass. What action could you take that would not upset the balance of power here? And consider not only what that would feel like for you, but what that may feel like for the survivor. Um, oh, I love this example from that was just put in the chat from Kristen. She talks about military communities that they're often like living in a fishbowl. So you see everyone everywhere all the time. So if you are working as an advocate in that situation, think about ethically what is the best thing for you to do. If you run into someone at a restaurant, if you end up in a meeting with someone, like what are some ways that you might handle those situations if you are also working in a close-knit community like a military base or a small town or small county. So excellent work. Thank you all for participating in that. And I hope that that gives you a way to think about ethics that really provides you this tool for like what would not upset this balance of power? What would keep me and the survivor in a relationship that's healing for both of us? So we're going to move on to our next mini presentation, and Alyssa's going to talk to you a little bit about vicarious trauma and some of the topics surrounding that.
Next slide.
Okay.
So these are the learning objectives for this segment of the training. By the end of this segment, you'll be able to describe vicarious trauma, compare and contrast vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout, and identify at least 3 warning signs of vicarious trauma and burnout. Next slide. So I want to start off with this definition of vicarious trauma. To break this down a little bit, vicarious means experiencing or taking on someone else's experiences through empathy. So think about experiencing through secondhand empathy. Trauma, as we've discussed in previous training sessions, is a deeply distressing or disturbing event. So taken together, vicarious trauma is the emotional residue of exposure that those have from interacting with people as they're hearing stories of trauma or becoming witnesses to the pain, fear, and terror that trauma survivors have endured. So before moving on to the next slide, let's put in the chat, what are some examples of professionals who may be at risk of experiencing vicarious trauma? So again, this is people who may not necessarily be directly experiencing the trauma themselves. They may be indirectly exposed to it. So mental health professionals or therapists, first responders, victim advocates, yep, EMTs, life coaches, law enforcement, definitely. Foster parents. Yeah, that's a really good one. Social workers, nurses, yep. Family members, yep. Chaplains, teachers, healthcare providers or caregivers, counselors, yep. Awesome. We can go on to the next slide. We have a couple of other examples here that we've listed. Basically, anybody with indirect exposure to trauma is at risk of experiencing vicarious traumatization. Next slide. So, some signs of vicarious trauma include physical and psychological symptoms, and this is often referred to as secondary traumatic stress. I do want to note that secondary traumatic stress is both a sign of vicarious trauma, and it's also a sign or symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. Secondary traumatic stress symptoms may include things like re-experiencing a survivor's traumatic event. It can be avoiding reminders of the event or persistent psychological arousal. Some other signs of vicarious trauma include emotional attachment to a survivor's decisions, over-identifying with the survivor's story, difficulty in maintaining professional boundaries, and being overly preoccupied with thoughts of the survivor outside of the workplace. Another sign of vicarious trauma that I want to highlight is something called countertransference. Can you all put in the chat a yes or a no if you've heard of this term, you're familiar with it, you know what it is? Awesome. So I'm seeing a lot of yeses. I'm seeing a couple of no's as well. All right. So I want to briefly go over it then, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And for the yeses, feel free to add any additional information in the chat. So countertransference is when a helping professional, such as an advocate or a social worker or mental health professional, when that person unconsciously projects their feelings about a client's situation back onto the client. So, for example, let's say an advocate is working with a survivor of sexual assault, and the survivor is describing their sexual assault and what happened to the advocate. Now, without realizing it, the advocate starts to feel some kind of way about what's being described. And maybe this is because they've experienced a sexual assault themselves, or maybe because they know someone who's experienced a sexual assault and it's similar to what the survivor is describing. And so these unconscious feelings start to boil up and they come across like asking questions such as, well, why didn't you do XYZ thing? Or, oh, well, you should have done XYZ thing. And so without realizing it, the advocate is projecting their feelings back onto the survivor because of how they feel about the situation. And this can be damaging because it gets in the way of that helping relationship. The important thing to remember is that countertransference can be managed if you are maintaining self-awareness, being aware of how you're feeling in these interactions with clients or survivors, pinpointing why you may feel a certain way, talking with a supervisor or colleagues, and getting to the bottom of those feelings and helping to maintain those healthy boundaries between you and the survivors that you're working with. Next slide. So, according to a study published in a 2019 article from the Journal of Social Work on predictors of secondary traumatic stress among social workers, 80% of survey respondents reported meeting diagnostic criteria for at least one of the three secondary traumatic stress scales symptom clusters. So to break this down a little bit, the first symptom cluster is intrusion symptoms. Intrusion symptoms may include things like having intrusive thoughts about clients, having disturbing dreams about clients. It can be a sense of reliving a client's traumatic experience, and other physiological reactions. The second symptom cluster is avoidance symptoms. These may include avoiding reminders of people, places, or things that remind you of the client's experience. It can be an inability to recall certain information about the client, diminished activity level, detachment from others, and emotional numbing. And the final symptom cluster is arousal symptoms. So these include things like difficulty sleeping, irritability, hypervigilance, being easily startled or having difficulty concentrating. So those are the three symptom clusters. And I bring up this article because, as we saw with the Code of Ethics slides earlier, the social work profession is very similar to that of our work as advocates. And social work being well researched, I wanted to bring up this article because advocates are also at risk of secondary traumatic stress. So to break down the findings of this study a little bit more, I have just a few polls that I wanted to share. And as I pop up these polls, think about what is most likely to be true given what we know about secondary traumatic stress and vicarious trauma. So just a moment. So the first poll is, what percentage of social workers in this study likely reported having trouble sleeping because of their work with clients who experienced trauma? All right, so I'm going to end the poll. So we have answers that are pretty spread out here, and these are all really good guesses. So the study reported that of the 80% of survey respondents who reported meeting diagnostic criteria for at least one of these three symptom clusters, about 40.35% reported experiencing trouble sleeping because of their work with clients who experienced trauma. All right, I'm going to go to the next poll here. So again here, and I see in the chat, yeah, so it is pretty high. So for the next one, similarly, just think about what you think would be most likely for social workers who reported experiencing trouble concentrating due to their work with clients who experience trauma. All right, I'm going to end the poll here. So again, we have answers that are pretty spread out. So the answer from the study, again, of the 80% who reported meeting diagnostic criteria, 39.47% reported experiencing trouble concentrating due to working with survivors of trauma. And then we have the last poll here, just a moment. Oops, wait a minute, sorry. That poll is coming out later. Okay, here's the poll for this study. So again, thinking, what is the percentage of social workers who likely reported feeling emotionally numb because of their work with survivors of trauma? All right, I'm going to end the poll here. All right, so we have a lot of answers here. The answer from the study is 35.96% of social workers reported feeling emotionally numb because of their work with clients who experience trauma. So again, with this study, and as we've seen with all of these numbers, is that it is high with the percentage who are reporting experiencing symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. Next slide. So professionals who are at risk of experiencing vicarious trauma may also be at risk of experiencing compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is empathetic strain and general exhaustion resulting from caring for people in distress. Some signs of compassion fatigue include emotional detachment and numbness. It can also include social withdrawal or intrusive negative thoughts, and secretive self-medication. Next slide. So some overall consequences of vicarious trauma and prolonged stress are burnout. Next slide. And I'm looking at the chat here. So Patrice says, as a social worker, I think compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma is a big issue that we often don't get guidance on in our training, how to prevent it or manage it. Awesome. Well, I'm glad that this training will be hopefully helpful for you. Um, so with burnout, burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when we feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, sorry, and unable to meet constant demands. Some signs that we may be experiencing burnout include things like a poor attitude towards our coworkers, our agency, or clients. It can be losing our why, our sense of doing this work, our purpose for being in this field, um, as well as continued exhaustion and decreased performance and productivity. So before moving on, I do want to just review the similarities and the differences between each of these terms we've now discussed: vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. So we've seen across each of these slides that the signs and symptoms are pretty similar, right? The main differences, though, are how they come about. So vicarious trauma, as we've discussed, is that indirect exposure to someone else's trauma. That's secondary traumatic stress. Compassion fatigue is that general exhaustion or empathetic strain as a result of caring for someone who's gone through a distressing incident. And that distressing incident doesn't necessarily have to be something that is traumatic. So that's the main difference there between those two. And then burnout is this overall mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion due to both vicarious trauma and prolonged stress. Next slide. So this is a video by Amy Cunningham through a 2016 TED Talk. She's going to talk a little bit about the importance of practicing self-care and managing compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. And as we watch this clip, I want you to put into the chat any words or phrases that really resonate with you as you're watching this.
That compassion fatigue can be identified, arrested, and treated at any time. That you can begin this journey for post-traumatic growth. That you can be better after trauma than you ever were before. And the best way I can think of putting this is when you think of an airplane, you know that the stewardess tells you where those exits are, and then they begin to tell you to please put your mask on you first before assisting other people. Now, every time I travel for vacation with my family, I show the stewardess that I'm listening. I get the cue card out of the backseat pocket, and I give eye contact. I'm almost the only person on the plane listening. And I show if the plane went down, I could save the plane. I'm real intense about it. And yet it never fails. Every time they finish, they come over to me and they say, "Excuse me, if there were a change in cabin pressure, what would you do?" And I'm a little offended. I don't know why they asked me that. But you see, that flight attendant, they see something you don't. They see the carry-ons that I travel with. They see this. They do see me. And they see this. You see, that flight attendant knows that no matter how much I listen to her, that I will put their masks on them first before caring for myself. But you see, she also knows that no matter how much of a supermom I believe I am, that I cannot live without oxygen. And yet every single day we do the same thing. I put your mask on you, and your mask on you, and your mask on you. And I don't care for myself. But you see, we can only give what we have. We give out of who we are. And if I don't care for myself, I certainly cannot care for you. So I'm going to ask you to complete a piece of homework for me. And I'm going to ask that you please do this every single day for the rest of your life. I have big expectations. I'm going to ask that you take 10. 10 minutes just for you. 10 minutes to put your mask on you first. 10 minutes to pray or meditate, to exercise or take a walk. But 10 minutes to care for you first. Take 10.
All right. So is there anything that really resonated? So I see April says, great analogy. Yes, I love that analogy. It definitely helps put into perspective the reason behind practicing self-care. Take 10. Yep. Yeah. Post-traumatic growth with an emphasis on the word growth. Yeah, definitely. I love that. Awesome. So as we wrap up this segment, I want to end on having a trauma-informed workplace. So every person we encounter has likely experienced direct or indirect exposure to trauma within their lifetime. So trauma-informed practice should not just end with how clients are served. Professionals in the victim services field can also benefit from a trauma-informed practice in our place of work. So agencies should prioritize policies to help prevent and address vicarious trauma and burnout in the workplace. And now I'll turn it back over to Stephanie for self-care.
All right. So let's finish off strong with this last section. And we're going to be talking really about how we are putting those masks on. We're going to invite you to drop a lot of stuff in the chat. We have another poll question, another Slido. So I think these are really, we can really benefit from learning from each other and what we do for self-care and self-soothing and to maintain ourselves in this work as we, as we engage with survivors. I will also say share at whatever level is comfortable for you. If you're not comfortable sharing what you do for self-care, no worries. You don't have to put anything in the chat. But if you feel comfortable, we want to invite you to do that. And so in this next section, you'll see a lot of us asking you to participate. So the learning objectives for the self-care section, at the end of the session, you'll be able to compare and contrast self-soothing and self-care. What are the differences there? You'll be able to describe the consequences of poor self-care, which some of you may already, like me, be familiar with. Classify self-care strategies and apply self-care strategies to your personal self-care plan. So let's jump in and talk about self-care, because I think self-care is a word that gets thrown around, but oftentimes might not be, but oftentimes we don't take time to define it. So self-care is the intentional activity and practice meant to reduce stress, maintain physical, psychological, and emotional health. So I also like to talk about this other thing that you don't often hear about, but are probably familiar with, and it's self-soothing. So we often hear this term self-soothing as part of infant or child development. So like babies sleeping through the night or babies waking up and not crying out because they're learning to self-soothe. But we carry self-soothing techniques with us throughout our lives, and they grow and change as we grow and change. So where a baby might be able to, wake up in the middle of the night and not cry out, a toddler might use something like sucking on their thumb or their finger to self-soothe. Self-soothing techniques are typically things that we do: yoga, golf, walking around the block, binge watching TV, scrolling or posting on social media, deep breathing, drinking a beer or a glass of wine on a stressful day. They're things that we do to make ourselves feel good in that moment. So they are soothing us and bringing us back to an emotional regulated state. Self-soothing is absolutely a part of self-care. It helps us manage stress. It can help us be happier and more relaxed in the moment. But self-care goes beyond making ourselves feel better. And it's really more about taking care of ourselves and building up our resistance. Some self-soothing and self-care techniques are very similar or the same. Some self-soothing things, if you do them too much and you rely on them too much for coping or self-soothing, they could work against our self-care. And so, for example, in my own life, I do yoga on a regular basis. And so for me, that is both self-soothing, calms me down in the moment, makes me feel better, helps me relax, but it also is good for like my long-term health as well. Something like, but I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon. It's a routine checkup that I do once or twice a year, going to the dermatologist. There is nothing self-soothing about this experience. For those of you that also go to the dermatologist, you may know this. But it's a good example of self-care. It's me taking care of my physical body, taking care of my emotional health by not having this stressor and actually going to get stuff checked out. So it's not self-soothing, but it's absolutely self-care. And like I said, some self-soothing techniques can go against our strategies for taking care of ourselves. For example, baking delicious treats and eating them might be self-soothing, which is great. I did this a lot actually in the early pandemic. I did what I called rage baking, where I'd get upset and I would just take it out on baking a loaf of bread or baking muffins or cookies or whatever. It was great. But eating too many sugary treats worked against our self-care. So I had blood work that came back not great. My husband was like, hey, my triglycerides are up. We got to knock it off with the bread. So we had to change and use some other coping techniques. We want you to think about these things when you're thinking about self-care and self-soothing. And so I don't want you to give up your self-soothing behaviors. I want you to be able to eat your cookies or your chocolate sometimes or have your glass of wine or beer, but you want to make sure that you're also looking at your long-term self-care. And we're really going to get into that in the next couple of slides. So we have a poll question. So Alyssa's going to launch this. And we want to really get into why we don't practice self-care. So go ahead and answer the question, why you don't practice self-care. Does it feel selfish or you have too many other people that you're taking care of? Are you just too busy? Is it too expensive? Or is there another reason why you might not be practicing self-care? Lots of people are saying too busy. We still have some folks answering, so let me give you a little bit more time to answer this question. I'll take a sip of water, which staying hydrated is absolutely self-care. Great. So all of these things are answered. So I'm going to end this poll and share the results. The most popular answer is too busy, which I think even if you answered something else, like feeling selfish or having too many people to take care of, too busy is also on your list. That's one of the most popular answers all around. But we also get people talking about it feeling selfish or taking care of too many other people. So we're going to dive into what that means a little bit here. So there's all kinds of also other reasons why we might not practice self-care. But I think Audre Lorde gave us this great quote, and she really talks about how caring for herself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So the work that we do is tough. Working with survivors is hard. And we talk about burnout, vicarious trauma, and self-care in the same presentation because we want you to see that connection. If you aren't practicing self-care on a regular basis, it can burn you out. And then you're not useful to the field at all because you are just too exhausted. And I speak from my own experience when I've been burnt out or wanted to leave the field. And you've spent too much time learning how to do this work, being passionate about helping survivors to not practice good self-care and not keep yourself in the work by doing self-preservation. So the next time you think you're too busy, or the next time you think it's too selfish, or you're caring for too many people, remember that this is an act of political warfare to take care of ourselves, to keep ourselves in the work of supporting sexual assault survivors and advocating for them on many, many different levels. So I call this part of the presentation like the confessions. So feel free to not put anything in the chat, but if you're comfortable putting stuff in the chat, I definitely invite you to do that. We pay a price for not practicing good self-care or for letting our self-care and self-soothing get out of balance. So for many of us, we know when we're not practicing good self-care. Our bodies will tell us. So we're going to have this little confession time. So put in the chat if you feel comfortable when you know that you aren't practicing good care. Like what signs in your life, what is your body and your mind and your emotions and your heart, like what are they telling you when they're saying, hey, you are not practicing good self-care? And I will tell you ways that my body tells me when I'm not practicing good self-care. So I will get an eye twitch and I cannot control it at all. It's super distracting. Someone will be talking to me and my eye will just be really twitching. So if that's happening, I know I need to step away from some screens, take a rest, go outside, take a walk, and really start to decompress. And when it happens, it doesn't go away right away. Like it might last the rest of the day. It might last until I have a sleep cycle. So that eye twitch is a real indicator I'm not practicing good self-care. The other thing I do is clench my teeth. And I'll just be honest with this group because you've been so great the last week and a half. I clenched my teeth so hard that I I broke through a retainer that was supposed to last a lifetime. It lasted 15 months using it every day. The doctor was shocked. He's like, what did you do to this thing? It literally fell apart. And he had to give me like a much tougher retainer that he's like, we don't usually do this. But I clenched my teeth so hard at night. And I know that if I'm experiencing a lot of stress, I can really feel that in my jaw when I wake up in the morning. So let's see what some other folks might have put in. So for those of you that participated, thank you. Tension in shoulders, sugar cravings. Oh, April, I have that one too. Thank you for putting that in there. Not enough energy to stretch or go for a walk. So that's a great one. Like if you don't have energy for the other things you normally do, that can be a great sign that you're not practicing good self-care. Oh, I've got another eye twitcher. So Danielle, thanks for sharing that. And it can last for weeks. And it's terrible because once it starts, once you get to that point, it can really take your body a long time to go back to an emotionally regulated state with like the clenching and the eye twitches and the stuff you have no control over. Also starts craving things. So excellent. Being lethargic, less social, tense muscles. Absolutely. Can't sleep, but being tired. Oh, I hate that cycle. Neck tension, exhausted, irritable, muscle tightness, grinding teeth, poor sleep. All of these things are, breaking out, back pain, mood swings, all of these things can be indicators that we aren't practicing good self-care. So the good news here is we don't have to think about whether we're practicing good self-care or not. We already know. Our bodies already know these things. So let's talk a little bit more. You got almost all of them. I think this group really did, but these are some things too in your personal life, work life, and health that can really start to pop up. Losing self-esteem, wanting to isolate. People talked about not wanting to engage in social things. Personal life, you can see some damage to relationships. Like someone talked about being irritable and moody. Well, who does that affect but the people in your life? So not practicing good self-care can have an impact there. We didn't talk as much about workplace and how that manifests when you're not practicing good self-care, but lateness, absenteeism, getting physically sick can also be something that will affect your work. Poor morale. One of the things, and if you get a chance to watch the full video, we just gave you a quick glance at Amy's video, but one of the things she talks about is making excuses for poor behavior at work. So if you're stressed out, if you're burnout, if you're not practicing good self-care, that could definitely affect the workplace. And then all of these things we talked about for health, fatigue, headaches, weight loss or gain, cravings, weakened immune system, all of those things can be impacted by not practicing good self-care. So I want to give you the chance to give us some examples of what you do for self-care, what you do for self-soothing. And again, this is to share at your own comfort level, but go to the Slido, either using the code or going to slido.com and putting in this code. It's 1993705, and putting in what you do for self-care. It's all anonymous, so it's not going to tell you. Well, reading and yoga, someone's speaking right to my heart with their first couple. Those are things that I do. Walking and hiking, massages, going for a walk, hiking with your dog. Oh, we're going to talk about pets here in a minute and how great they are for self-care. Taking a nap. I will tell you, and I had a meeting with Alyssa yesterday afternoon, and she was so patient with me. I did not feel good. I was super excited. I finished that meeting and I immediately went and took a nap. I was like, I need 20 minutes of no screen time to rest. Like, I'm really not myself today. So that's excellent. Acupuncture. I love acupuncture. Ever put that in there? Running, walking. I saw hot bath on here. We're getting into like hot bath season as the nights get cooler. Journaling, um, cooking. I love the cooking one because cooking is one of the things that covers a lot of self-care things. Someone put smoking weed, love it, love it. And it's illegal in Maryland. So absolutely, if that's your self-soothing, go for it. Hanging out with your wife. Oh, that's really sweet. I also like to hang out with my spouse. So totally get it. Hang out with family, baking. These are great, great, great examples. And we're going to give you a chance to share more about those in the chats. And really looking at, we've got a couple people that smoke weed for self-soothing. I'm here for it. Good, great. Music, writing poetry, watercolors, art, all of those things really play into our self-care. So I'm going to move on to our next slide, and we're going to talk about, I'm going to turn it back over to Alyssa, and she's going to talk a little bit about some strategies for self-care, and then we're going to get into different categories of self-care. So Alyssa, turning it back over to you.
Yeah. Yep. So this is what we call the 3R approach. So with this approach, we want to recognize or be on the lookout for warning signs of compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout. And then if we happen to start experiencing some of those signs or symptoms, we want to reverse the damage. So actively work to manage the stress, and seek support. And then finally, build resilience. So that way we are taking care of ourselves and hopefully preventing future experiences of vicarious trauma or burnout or compassion fatigue. Next slide. So one of the ways to help us build resilience is to create a self-care action plan. Now, I want to highlight here that there's two types of self-care. There's maintenance self-care and emergency self-care. So maintenance self-care is things we do every day. And I already see some people putting some things in the chat, so that's great. So things that we do to take care of ourselves are in day-to-day. It could be as simple as having a glass of water, staying hydrated, getting adequate sleep at night. Or it could be more complex, maybe 3 intentional stretch breaks at your work desk. Whereas emergency self-care, these are things that you would do immediately after an intense situation or a crisis situation. So for example, after some hospital advocacy, you get home at like 3 in the morning, and you drink a full glass of water. Maybe you're really dehydrated. Or after some intense legal advocacy, you do a deep breathing exercise in your car in the parking lot before driving home. So those are very specific things you would do to help bring your central nervous system back to its state of equilibrium after that crisis situation has happened. So in either case, either maintenance self-care, emergency self-care, it may be helpful to have a self-care action plan. And I have the steps here listed on the slide. The first thing you want to do is identify the problem or the reason for having the plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. So for example, the problem may be you're already experiencing signs of burnout. That would be your reason for having this plan. Or maybe it's that you want to prevent having experiences of burnout. The next step is to create your goal. So think of this as something kind of like broad or lofty of how you're going to address the problem. So say your thing that you wanted to do is prevent risk of burnout. your goal would be maybe to increase self-care protective factors to reduce risk of burnout. Your strategy is a little bit more specific. It helps you to achieve the goal, but it's still broad enough that you can fit a couple of different activities under it. So, for example, if your goal was to increase self-care protective factors, your strategy might be to increase physical wellness. That's a specific strategy, tells us what we're focusing on, how we're going to increase self-care protective factors, but still broad enough that we can do a bunch of different things to reach that strategy. And then finally, we have the techniques or activities. So these are things you're doing to meet your strategy. So again, say your strategy is to increase physical wellness. Your technique might be 3 intentional stretch breaks at your desk. It could be going for a 1-mile walk after work a couple of days a week. These techniques or activities, these are the most specific part of your self-care action plan, things that tell you exactly what you're doing, when you're doing it, or how many times you're doing it. The important thing to remember with a self-care action plan is that it's kind of like this living, breathing document, or this living, breathing thing that you can adjust or modify as you figure out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, something new you want to try, and then tracking whether you're actually doing it. The last thing we want to do is add more stress to our plates. So just definitely think about this as a living, breathing document. Next slide. So this is the self-care wheel that we will be referring to for the next couple of slides. It was created by the Olga Phoenix Project. And it splits self-care into these different categories here you see on the slide. I do want to make a note here that you all will receive a blank self-care wheel in a follow-up email. So you can go through and add some activities or build your self-care action plan on your blank self-care wheel. I'll also be sharing some additional self-care resources, self-assessments for monitoring whether you've experienced compassion fatigue or burnout or vicarious trauma, as well as some other helpful things for your toolkits, including infographics, some meditation videos. So you'll have all of that as part of your toolkit after this training. So to break down each of the self-care categories, over the next couple of slides, we're going to ask you to put some things in the chat as we move through each pie segment. Next slide.
All right,
All right.
here we go. So some of you have already been putting some self-care stuff in. So please feel free to repeat anything you put in as it relates to some of these categories. The chat moves really fast in this presentation. So think about some things and share some things that you do for physical health. What are some things that you do to take care of your physical self? So put in the chat what you feel comfortable sharing. I'm seeing exercise come up right away, walking, strength training at the gym, walking their dog. Oh yeah, these are great. Just staying any kind of, physically active in any way. Yoga, dance, Pilates, absolutely, absolutely. Someone put in here pole dancing, absolutely. Watching what they eat, so eating healthy food. We've got boxing in here. Needing safe places to release rage. Agreed. Agreed. So all of those things go work towards your self-help. So I'm going to put some of them on the screen that we came up with. So Alyssa had mentioned this in her last slide, drinking water. So like staying hydrated, eating a healthy diet, getting enough sleep. The one that I want to emphasize here too, that we don't often see people talking about, is making those regular medical care appointments. So if you have that available, going to the doctor, getting things checked out, making sure that you're taking care of your health in that way as well. So excellent job on this one. So I like to think about, physical health as, how are you taking care of your physical body? And I'll turn over to Alyssa for the next one.
Thanks. Yep. So psychological self-care, these are things that you're doing to take care of your brain. So what are some ways that you can practice psychological self-care? Therapy, positive thinking. Yep.
Beauty care. Nice one, Sarah. Sorry, that was at the very top. I thought you might have missed it, Alyssa, but I like that.
Oh yeah. Yep. Affirmations. Yes. I love positive affirmations. I actually have sticky notes on my wall of just a bunch of positive affirmations that I look at during the day. Deep breathing. Yep. Resting. Yeah. Engaging in expressive art groups, staying present, meditation. Yeah. Replacing work day or time with something else affirms importance of the rest of your life. Yeah, so maintaining that good work-life balance. I think I saw sister circle as another one. Practicing self-expression. Yeah. So we have a couple of ones here on the slide. A lot of you already put these. So just really just taking that time for yourself, practicing mindfulness, um, finding creative outlets to express yourself. Yeah.
All right, so this is our emotional self-care. Um, and these are things we do to take care of our heart. So taking care of your body, taking care of your mind, taking care of your heart. So we put in the chat any examples of emotional self-care. And as you'll see at this point in the presentation, um, some things overlap. So something you might do might cover a lot of these categories. So, sometimes we'll hear people that are like runners or, walkers or hikers, that also helps with their emotional or psychological self-care. For this slide, this is my favorite slide. We have pictures of our pets. So we think pets are great emotional self-care. So Alyssa, do you want to introduce your pet and then I'll introduce Cinco?
Sure. So my cat is the one at the bottom, that's Coda. And he when he I just he's great, a great playmate. And I definitely that's how I practice emotional self-care. After work is laying on the ground and playing with him. He has this string he really loves. So um yeah, Steph, if you want to introduce your cat.
Yeah, this is Cinco, the top one. He is a very poofy orange cat. He's an old man at this point. I think he's almost 14. And he is a great example of self-care. He's not afraid to ask what he wants for. He takes a nap whenever he wants. And when he wants cuddles, I see someone put in here about talking about being held or cuddled by their spouse. Like I'll tell you, this cat, when he wants cuddles. Nothing will get in his way. So great example of self-care. Oh, thank you, Catherine. They are cute. Our Coda and Cinco are so cute. And we love putting them in this presentation. I'm seeing lots of great examples of emotional self-care in the chat. Practicing self-expression, crying when you need to. Yeah, just that emotional release. I mean, lots of people are going to be like, I just need something that's funny. I need something to watch something that is funny, or I need to just cry. Like I need to watch like a heartbreaking TV show or movie just to cry. Some people also like to be scared. So we're coming up on scary movie season. All of those things can maybe help with emotional self-care, just those releases. Wanting to be held or cuddled, um, having your pets around. Um, so absolutely expressing emotions through doing different kinds of artwork. Absolutely. We talked about artwork for taking care of your brain, but it can also take care of your emotions. Success says going to the movies. I love going to the movies. Sometimes that really is just what I need. Oh, someone's already in Christmas movie mode. And so all of those things can be good examples of self-care. I also want to put some on the screen here that we came up with. So spending times with friends, family, and cats. We talked about pets, but spending time with your friends is also important. Engaging in any kind of hobby that makes you happy. Recognizing your self-worth, your hard work. So giving yourself rewards for that. And then releasing emotions through movies or other ways, or reading a good book, or some of those things can really help with emotional self-care.
Awesome. And with spiritual self-care. So this, I do want to note, this could be through religion, but it doesn't have to be. It could also be through other means, such as being in nature or finding a spiritual community. So what are some examples of spiritual self-care? Oh, um, is everyone able to see the slides? Looks like I'm able to see the slides. Okay. If anyone's having trouble seeing the slides, try logging out and then coming back in. All right, so I'm seeing for spiritual self-care, connecting with nature, praying, meditation, walking in nature, reading, reading the Bible, journaling, reflecting on what gives you meaning. Yeah, I love that. Crafting. Yeah. Yeah, these are awesome. Meditation. Awesome. So we have a couple more here on the slide of things that we've come up with, but you've all already put these in the chat. One thing I do want to highlight is potentially volunteering for a cause. Sometimes it can be helpful to volunteer for something that we don't already do in our lives in this work. So maybe volunteering at an animal shelter or something, or volunteering at the local library. Volunteering for something that still makes an impact, but isn't as intense as our day-to-day work. Let's see. Oh, and someone put singing in the choir, sitting in silence. Yeah, those are other really good ones.
So listen, I got us off track here. I just jumped in with the physical stuff. So do you want to do the personal self-care as well?
Sure. So personal self-care, these are things that you do for your overall well-being. So, and again, some of these may be similar to other categories we've already discussed. So feel free for any additional personal self-care things you want to put in the chat. And I do want to highlight, looks like for spiritual self-care, someone put pro bono work as their cause, their other thing that they work on. All right, so for personal self-care, we have setting boundaries, learning new things, salt bath with essential oils, cooking for yourself and other people. I love that too. Being in nature, traveling, time alone to recharge. Yes, definitely. Spa therapy, choosing agencies that honor your self-care. Yeah, I think that also goes into professional self-care, which we'll go over on the next slide. Let's see, some others for personal self-care, spending quality time with people, traveling, creative pursuits, so recording music, painting with no purpose, writing a novel. Awesome. Yep. And we have a few more here on the slide as well. So it could also look like creating a budget, just helping yourself stay organized in day-to-day life. Making time to build relationships or maintaining relationships, and just setting short-term and long-term goals for yourself.
So our last category is professional self-care. And what I will say when we talk about professional self-care is we're really talking about how to take care of yourself at work. So put in any ideas you have for your professional self-care, and what you do at work to take care of yourself. And then we'll add some others here. While folks are generating that list, I will tell you as a supervisor, one of the things that we work hard at MCASA to do is making sure that people are taking their time that they've earned. If they're sick, they're taking sick time. If they need personal time, they're making sure they use that time, making sure they use all their vacation time, working with them to prioritize so that they can take that time off. So as a supervisor, I talk to staff a lot about that. Like, that's important. You earned that time. That's not a gift. Like, you earned it. So we want you to be able to take it. And this time of year, we actually have quite a few people taking time off in September because our fiscal year ends on September 30th. So we talk about that a lot, especially this time of year. I'm seeing not skipping lunch, shutting my door during my lunch break. So making sure that you are able to actually take that break. So lots of comments on lunch. Not doing things for free. So absolutely. So if you are having to take on extra work, negotiating what that means for your time and your compensation. Someone else talking about taking their paid time off. Taking breaks during the day, maybe stretch breaks or other things, doing debriefs with your colleagues. Hannah, that's a great one. Kind of using your colleagues for support as well. Sometimes it can be hard to go home and talk about work, either because your work is confidential and you're not allowed, or the people that live in your home don't understand it. So the people that you work with are going to understand that better. Avoiding gossip, learning new skills. This is a great one, Christopher. I love this learning new skills, gaining knowledge or increasing your professional development. So these are great examples. We came up with some examples here too. So chatting with a coworker, that debrief with coworkers and building those relationships with coworkers can be professional self-care, breathing exercises during work, going for a walk during your day. MCASA staff work a lot from home, so it's easy for me to take my lunch break and go for a quick walk and get some vitamin D outside or just some movement before I come back and sit at my desk. Planning for professional development. So going to things like professional conferences if you can, or negotiating with your employer if there's a class you want to take. Alyssa and I both last fall we took two different classes, but it was on training, like how to train folks better. And so we were able to come back and share that with our colleagues and really kind of grow our skill set. So setting reachable goals, taking your sick time, taking your lunch time, all of those things can be professional ways to do that. Someone talked about setting up a Zen den in their office, so like a place where they can take a minute. So excellent ideas. So continue to read those in the chat as we move on to our personal self-care wheel that Alyssa's going to talk about. Also think about how also read in the chat some other ideas for professional self-care. Some folks had some really great ideas. So Alyssa, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, you're going to get a copy of this blank self-care wheel. So you can take some notes from some ideas from the chat, and add this to your self-care wheel. Also, just assess what are you already doing. Give yourself some credit. I saw a lot of great responses from a lot of people here. So what are you already doing? And then as like a little like takeaway from this presentation, think about what can you do in the next 7 days to improve your self-care or continue to maintain your self-care. Think about what you can do a month from now to improve your self-care or maintain your self-care. So again, you'll be receiving a copy of this blank self-care wheel and some additional self-care resources in a follow-up email.
All right,
And
friends, that
that,
brings us up. Go ahead,
sorry.
Alyssa. Go ahead.
And that wraps us up for this presentation today. I just put the evaluation link into the chat. Again, we greatly appreciate all feedback as we are constantly striving to improve. If you are seeking a certificate of attendance, you must complete the evaluation form. Upon submitting the evaluation form, you'll gain access to the certificate request form. So again, I'll be sending out a follow-up email later today with a copy of the recording, the PowerPoint slides, evaluation link, and all of the resources that we've talked about today. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you tomorrow.